The scream cut through the afternoon air like a blade, and Gideon Hayes was already spurring his horse forward before his mind had fully registered what he was seeing. A young woman was caught in something, her dress tangled in the harness of two panicked draft horses that were bolting across the dusty plain just outside Ordway, Colorado, dragging her body toward the rocky canyon edge less than 100 yards away. Her arms flailed wildly as she tried to free herself, her screams raw with terror as the massive animals pulled her faster and faster across the unforgiving ground. Gideon's heart hammered against his ribs as he urged his stallion into a full gallop, the wind tearing at his hat and vest. He could see the woman's dark hair whipping around her face, could see the blood already staining her torn sleeves where the ground had scraped her skin raw. The horses were completely wild with fear, their eyes rolling white, and they showed no sign of slowing as they thundered toward certain death for all three of them. He had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the canyon. Gideon leaned low over his horse's neck, his thighs gripping tight as he pushed for every ounce of speed the animal could give. The distance closed agonizingly slow, the woman's screams growing more desperate as she realized how close she was to the edge. 20 seconds. 15. He could see her trying to tear at the fabric that bound her, could see the absolute terror in her face as she twisted to look back at the approaching drop. 10 seconds. Gideon pulled alongside the runaway team, reaching out to grab at the nearest horse's bridle. His fingers caught leather, and he hauled back with all his strength, his shoulders screaming in protest as his weight barely made a difference. The horses veered slightly but kept running, foam flying from their mouths as their hooves pounded the earth. 5 seconds. He let go of the bridle and instead threw himself from his saddle directly at the woman, his arms wrapping around her waist as they both tumbled hard into the dirt. His body took the worst of the impact, rocks digging into his back and legs as they rolled twice, 3 times. He held her tight against his chest, protecting her head with one hand as they finally skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. The draft horses kept running, and Gideon heard rather than saw them plunge over the canyon edge with terrified screams that cut off abruptly. The silence that followed felt impossibly loud. For a moment, neither of them moved. Gideon could feel the woman's heart racing against his chest, could feel her entire body shaking with shock and fear. His own breath came in ragged gasps, pain radiating from what felt like every part of his body. But they were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. The woman pushed herself up slightly. Her hands braced against his chest as she stared down at him with wide, dark green eyes. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, and there was a cut bleeding slowly above her left eyebrow. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. She just stared at him, trembling. Gideon carefully sat up, keeping his hands steady on her shoulders to make sure she did not collapse. "You are all right," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You are safe now. I have got you." The words seemed to break something in her. She let out a choked sob and buried her face against his shoulder, her hands clutching at his vest as she shook with the force of her tears. Gideon wrapped his arms around her and held her close, letting her cry, feeling his own hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline still flooding his system. His stallion trotted over, snorting and tossing his head nervously. In the distance, Gideon could see a wagon stopped on the road, and several people running toward them across the plain. But for this moment, it was just him and this terrified woman in his arms, both of them trying to remember how to breathe. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, once her sobs had subsided into shaky breaths. She pulled back enough to look at him, wiping at her face with dirty hands. "Hannah," she whispered. "Hannah Olsen." "Gideon Hayes," he replied. "Can you tell me what happened?" Hannah took a shuddering breath, and he could see her trying to pull herself together. "The horses, they spooked at a rattlesnake. I was climbing down from the wagon and my skirt caught in the harness. I could not get free. They just kept running, and I kept screaming, and nobody could hear me, and then you," her voice broke again, "you saved my life." Anyone would have done the same, Gideon said, though they both knew that was not quite true. He had been in the right place at the right time, and he had been willing to risk his own neck without thinking twice about it. The people from the wagon reached them, and Gideon recognized old Samuel Morris and his wife Martha, along with their 2 grown sons. Martha immediately dropped to her knees beside Hannah, fussing over the cuts and scrapes on her arms. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed. "Hannah, child, we thought for certain you were dead. We saw the whole thing. Those horses just went wild, and you got caught up and we could not catch up in time." She looked at Gideon with tears in her own eyes. "Thank God you were riding this way, young man. Thank God." Samuel helped Gideon to his feet, and the cowboy bit back a groan as every bruise and scrape made itself known. "You took quite a tumble yourself," Samuel observed. "Best come back to town with us. Let Doc Peterson have a look at both of you." Gideon nodded, then looked down at Hannah, who Martha was helping to stand. The young woman swayed slightly, and without thinking, Gideon stepped forward and slipped an arm around her waist to steady her. She leaned into him gratefully, and he felt something shift in his chest at the trust in that gesture. "Can you ride?" he asked her gently. Hannah looked at his horse and shook her head, her face pale. "I do not think my legs will hold me." "Then you will ride with me," Gideon said. It was not a question. He led his stallion over and mounted carefully, feeling his bruised muscles protest. Then he reached down, and Samuel and his sons helped lift Hannah up to sit sideways in front of him. She settled against his chest with a soft sigh, her head resting just under his chin, and Gideon wrapped one arm securely around her waist. The ride back to Ordway took nearly an hour. The Morris family drove their wagon slowly, and Gideon kept his horse to a gentle walk, conscious of Hannah's injuries and the shock she had experienced. She did not speak during the journey, but he could feel her gradually relaxing against him as the trembling in her body slowly subsided. Ordway was a small but growing town in the eastern plains of Colorado, established just a few years earlier in 1884 when the railroad came through. It was 1887 now, and the town had settled into a comfortable rhythm, with a main street lined with businesses, a church, a school, and clusters of homes spreading out from the center. The surrounding prairie stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by the occasional canyon or creek bed. They drew attention as they rode down Main Street, and by the time they reached Doc Peterson's office, a small crowd had gathered. The doctor, a stern-faced man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, took one look at them and ushered them inside immediately. "Martha, you and Samuel can go on," Doc Peterson said firmly. "I will take care of these two. You can spread the word that they are alive and being tended to." The examination was thorough but mercifully quick. Hannah had numerous cuts and scrapes, particularly on her arms and shoulders, along with bruising that would likely get worse over the next few days. But nothing was broken, and the cut on her forehead was shallow enough that it would not need stitches. Gideon had fared similarly, with spectacular bruising across his back and ribs, a gash on his left arm that Doc Peterson did stitch up, and various other scrapes and bumps. "You are both incredibly lucky," the doctor said as he bandaged Hannah's arms. Another few seconds, and this would have been a very different kind of visit. Hannah's eyes found Gideon's across the room, and he saw the knowledge of that truth reflected in her gaze. Another few seconds, and she would have been dead at the bottom of that canyon, along with those poor horses. "Where are you staying, Miss Olsen?" Doc Peterson asked. "You should not be alone tonight. The shock of something like this can hit hard once the adrenaline wears off." "I have a room at Mrs. Crawford's boarding house," Hannah said quietly. "I have been living there for the past 3 months since I came to Ordway." "I will walk you there," Gideon said immediately. "Make sure you get settled safely." Hannah looked like she might protest, but then she simply nodded, and Gideon saw the exhaustion in every line of her body. She was running on empty, held together by sheer willpower. They left the doctor's office as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gideon offered his arm, and Hannah took it without hesitation, leaning on him more than he thought she realized as they walked slowly down the street. People called out to them, asking if they were all right, expressing relief and amazement at their survival. Gideon responded politely but kept moving, wanting to get Hannah somewhere safe and quiet. Mrs. Crawford's boarding house was a large 2-story building on the east end of town, painted white with blue shutters and a wide front porch. The proprietor, a kindly widow in her 60s, met them at the door with tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Hannah," she cried, pulling the younger woman into a careful embrace. "I heard what happened. I've been beside myself with worry. Come in, both of you." She ushered them into a cozy parlor and insisted on bringing them tea and fresh bread with butter, despite Hannah's protests that she was fine. Gideon sat quietly, watching as Hannah sipped her tea with shaking hands, her eyes distant. She was clearly replaying the events in her mind, processing the terror and the near-death experience. "You should eat something," he said gently, "even if you do not feel hungry." Hannah looked at him, and for the first time since the accident, she really seemed to see him. Her gaze traveled over his face, taking in the dust still clinging to his dark hair, the scrapes on his jaw, the bandage on his arm visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. He was in his mid-20s, she guessed, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, but also a gentleness in how he looked at her. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. "You could have died. Those horses could have trampled us both, or we could have gone over the edge together. Why did you risk your life for a stranger?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because I could not live with myself if I had just watched you die when there was a chance I could save you. Because your life is worth saving, Hannah Olsen, even if I did not know your name at the time." Tears welled up in Hannah's eyes again, and she quickly looked down at her teacup. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Gideon said firmly. "I'm just glad I was there, Mrs." Crawford returned then, shooing Gideon toward the door with gentle but firm insistence. "The girl needs rest, Mr. Hayes. You can come by tomorrow to check on her if you like, but for now she needs to sleep." Gideon stood, but before he left, he looked at Hannah one more time. "If you need anything, anything at all, you can find me at the livery stable at the north end of town. I work there most days." Hannah nodded, and he thought he saw the faintest hint of a smile touch her lips. "I will remember that." As Gideon walked through the darkening streets back to his own small room above the stable, he found his thoughts full of green eyes and dark hair, of a woman's courage in the face of terror, and of the strange, fierce protectiveness he had felt the moment he had wrapped his arms around her. He had saved many people over the years, pulled them from floods or fires or dangerous animals, but something about Hannah Olsen was different. Something about her had struck him deep in a place he had not known existed. He fell asleep that night thinking of her smile and dreamed of running horses and desperate screams that turned into laughter. The next morning, Gideon woke early as always, his body protesting every movement. The bruises had indeed gotten worse overnight, blooming in spectacular shades of purple and blue across his back and ribs. But he had work to do, and he had never been one to lie around feeling sorry for himself. The livery stable was owned by a gruff but fair man named Tom Butler, who took one look at Gideon and shook his head. "Heard about what you did yesterday," Tom said. "Damn fool thing, jumping off a galloping horse like that. Brave, but foolish." "Would you have done differently?" Gideon asked mildly as he began mucking out stalls. Tom snorted. "Probably the same damn fool thing. Does not make it any less crazy." He paused, then added more quietly, "You did good, boy. That girl would be dead if not for you." The morning passed slowly, and Gideon found himself constantly thinking about Hannah, wondering how she was feeling, whether she had slept, whether the shock had set in. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that she was being well cared for at the boarding house, but the worry persisted. Around noon, he could not stand it anymore. He cleaned up as best he could, changed into a fresh shirt, and walked to the boarding house, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Crawford answered his knock with a knowing smile. "I wondered when you would show up," she said. "She's in the back garden, been sitting out there all morning, staring at nothing." Gideon found Hannah on a bench beneath a large cottonwood tree, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress, and her arms were neatly bandaged. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid, and in the dappled sunlight, she looked younger than he had thought the day before. Early 20s, he guessed. She looked up as he approached, and her face brightened. "Gideon," she said, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "I was hoping you would come." "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. "Sore," Hannah admitted. "And strange. I keep thinking about what almost happened, and then I cannot seem to think about anything else, and then I force myself to think about other things, and it just keeps going in circles." She turned to look at him. "Is that normal?" "I think so," Gideon said. "You went through something terrible. It is going to take time to process it all." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds in the tree above them and the distant sounds of the town going about its business. Finally, Hannah spoke again. "I should tell you about myself," she said. "Since you saved my life, it seems only fair that you know who I am." Gideon smiled. "Only if you want to." Hannah took a breath. "I came to Ordway 3 months ago from Pennsylvania. My parents died last year, within 2 months of each other. Father had a bad heart, and Mother just seemed to give up after he was gone. They left me the house, but it was mortgaged to the roof, and after I paid off all the debts, there was nothing left." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I'd been working as a seamstress, but there was nothing keeping me in Pennsylvania anymore. My aunt lives in Denver, and she wrote to say I could come stay with her if I wanted a fresh start. So I sold everything I had, bought a train ticket, and headed west." "How did you end up in Ordway?" Gideon asked. "I got off the train here to stretch my legs and get some food," Hannah said. "While I was walking around, I met Mrs. Crawford. We started talking, and she mentioned that the town dressmaker had recently passed away and there was no one to take her place. She offered me a room at a reduced rate if I would consider staying and opening a shop." Hannah shrugged. "It seemed like a sign. Denver is a big city, and I did not really know my aunt that well. But here was a small town that needed exactly what I could offer. So I stayed." "And how has it been?" Gideon asked. "Do you like Ordway?" "I do," Hannah said, and she sounded a little surprised at her own answer. "It is very different from what I knew back east. Quieter in some ways, wilder in others. But the people have been kind, and I have had more work than I can handle. I've been saving up to buy my own place, maybe a small shop with living quarters above it." She smiled ruefully. "Or at least, I was saving. I do not know what happened to the wagon yesterday, or if any of my supplies survived." "I can find out," Gideon offered. "The Morris family would know, and if anything was damaged, I will help you replace it." Hannah turned to him with wide eyes. "You absolutely will not. Gideon, you already saved my life. You do not owe me anything else." "Maybe I want to help," Gideon said quietly. "Would that be so terrible?" She studied his face for a long moment, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical touch. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you want to help me?" It was a fair question, and Gideon found himself struggling to put his feelings into words. "Because yesterday, when I saw you in danger, something in me just knew I had to save you," he said slowly. "And now that I have, I find I cannot stop thinking about you. I want to know you are safe. I want to know you are happy. I want to spend time with you and hear you talk and see you smile." He met her eyes. "Is that so strange?" Hannah's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at her hands. "No," she whispered. "It is not strange, because I have been thinking about you too. All morning, all night, I kept seeing your face, feeling your arms around me, remembering how you did not hesitate for even a second before risking everything to save me." She looked up at him again. "You are a good man, Gideon Hayes. I would very much like to know you better." The smile that spread across Gideon's face felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then we have an understanding," he said. "I will court you properly, Hannah Olsen, if you will let me." "I would like that," Hannah said softly, and when she smiled at him, Gideon felt his heart skip a beat. Over the next weeks, Gideon and Hannah saw each other nearly every day. He would stop by the boarding house in the evenings after work, and they would walk through town together or sit in Mrs. Crawford's garden and talk for hours. Gideon learned that Hannah loved to read, that she had a quick wit and a sharp mind, that she had a talent for capturing the essence of a person in her dress designs. Hannah learned that Gideon had grown up on a ranch in Texas, that he had left home at 18 to see the world, that he loved working with horses more than anything else, and that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of deep feeling and strong convictions. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval. Everyone had heard the story of the rescue by now, and the romantic notion of a cowboy saving a beautiful young woman from certain death had captured the collective imagination. People smiled when they saw Gideon and Hannah together, and Mrs. Crawford played enthusiastic chaperone, always leaving the door open but giving them just enough privacy to talk freely. One evening, about a month after the accident, Gideon took Hannah to see the canyon where it had all happened. They rode together on his horse, Hannah sitting in front of him with his arms around her, and as they approached the edge, he felt her stiffen slightly. "We do not have to get close," he said quietly. "I just thought it might help to see it again, to face the fear." Hannah took a deep breath and nodded. "I want to see it." They dismounted, and Gideon kept his hand in hers as they walked to the edge of the canyon. It was a drop of perhaps 50 feet, the bottom littered with rocks and sparse vegetation. Hannah stared down, and Gideon saw her shudder. "That is where I would have died," she said quietly. "Right there, broken on those rocks." "But you did not," Gideon said firmly. "You are here. You are alive, and you are not alone." Hannah turned to look at him, and there were tears shining in her eyes. "I'm so grateful," she whispered, "so incredibly grateful that you were there that day, that you did not hesitate, that you are here with me now." She reached up and touched his face gently. "I think I am falling in love with you, Gideon Hayes." His breath caught in his throat. "Hannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I fell in love with you the moment I held you in my arms and felt your heart beating against mine. I have been yours from that very first second." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, pouring all his feelings into that one perfect moment. Hannah kissed him back, her hands sliding up to rest against his chest, and Gideon felt like everything in his life had been leading to this, to her, to this exact moment on the edge of a canyon where death had so nearly claimed her. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Hannah was smiling through her tears. "Take me home," she said, "and tomorrow let us start planning our future." The courtship continued through summer and into fall. Gideon formally asked for Hannah's hand in September, presenting her with a simple gold ring that had been his grandmother's. Hannah said yes with tears of joy, and they set the wedding date for November, giving Hannah time to sew her own dress and make preparations. The wedding was held in the small church in Ordway on a crisp November morning in 1887. Hannah wore a dress of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Gideon wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back, his hands trembling slightly as Hannah walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed Hannah with such tenderness that more than one person in the congregation wiped away tears. They celebrated with a reception at the boarding house, and as Gideon danced with his new wife, he marveled at the twist of fate that had brought them together. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Hannah set up her sewing in one corner, and Gideon built her a proper work table. He continued working at the livery, and she continued taking orders for dresses and alterations. They were not wealthy, but they were happy, and that was worth more than any amount of gold. Their first winter together was harsh, with bitter winds sweeping across the plains and snow piling up in drifts against the house. But inside, wrapped in quilts in each other's arms, Gideon and Hannah created their own warmth. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Gideon discovered that Hannah sang while she sewed, soft melodies that filled the house with music. Hannah discovered that Gideon was a talented whittler, and he began carving small animals and birds that lined their windowsills. In the spring, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear, but mostly joy. Gideon became even more protective than before, insisting that Hannah not overwork herself, making sure she ate well and rested often. Hannah tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from a place of deep love. Their son was born in early October of 1888, a healthy boy with his father's whiskey-colored eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel Thomas Hayes, after the man who had helped them on that fateful day, and he became the center of their world. Gideon would come home from work and scoop his son into his arms, marveling at the perfection of his tiny fingers and toes. Hannah would sit and nurse the baby while singing her soft songs, and Gideon would watch them both with such love in his eyes that Hannah sometimes had to look away, overwhelmed by the emotion. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Gideon was promoted to manager of the livery stable when Tom Butler decided to semi-retire, which came with a modest increase in pay. Hannah's sewing business continued to thrive, and she hired a young girl from town to help with the simpler tasks so she could focus on the more complex orders. They saved carefully, still dreaming of the day when Hannah could have her own shop. When Samuel was 2, they bought a small building on Main Street with living quarters above it. The ground floor became Hannah's dress shop, with large windows to let in plenty of light and shelves displaying fabrics and ribbons and lace. The upstairs was converted into a comfortable apartment, larger than their first house, with room for Samuel to run and play. The shop thrived. Women came from Ordway and the surrounding ranches to order dresses from Hannah, and her reputation for quality work and fair prices spread. Gideon continued to work at the livery, but he also began training horses on the side, using skills he had learned growing up on his father's ranch. The extra income allowed them to save more, to think about the future with confidence. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, was born in the spring of 1891. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's quick smile, and Samuel doted on his baby sister with all the fierce protectiveness of an older brother. The house above the shop was often filled with laughter and the sound of children playing, and Gideon would sometimes stop in the middle of his work and just listen, amazed at the life he had built. One evening, as they sat together on the small balcony outside their bedroom, watching the sunset over the plains, Hannah leaned her head against Gideon's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you saved me?" "Every day," Gideon admitted. "It was the day my life truly began." "Mine too," Hannah said. "Sometimes I still have nightmares about it. I dream that you do not reach me in time, that I go over the edge, that I never get to have any of this." She gestured to the town spread out before them, to the shop below, to the sound of their children playing inside. "And then I wake up, and you are there, and I remember that we did get our happily ever after." Gideon wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "We did. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving me your heart." "I could never regret it," Hannah whispered. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Gideon Hayes. You and those 2 beautiful children sleeping in the next room. This life we have built together. All of it." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. 2 people who had found each other in the most dramatic of circumstances and had chosen to build something beautiful together. The Wild West could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be a place of second chances and new beginnings. As the years passed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father and the horses. Elizabeth proved to have her mother's artistic talent, spending hours drawing and painting when she was not helping in the shop. In 1894, they welcomed another son, Joseph William, who had a sunny disposition and an infectious laugh that could brighten even the darkest day. The turn of the century found them prosperous and happy. Hannah's shop was the most successful business in Ordway, and Gideon's reputation as a horse trainer had spread far enough that people came from Denver and beyond to have him work with their animals. They had been able to buy a small ranch just outside town, with enough land for Gideon to breed and train horses properly, and a comfortable house with room for their growing family. But success and comfort did not change who they were at their core. Gideon was still the man who would risk everything to help someone in need, and Hannah was still the woman who faced fear with courage and grace. They raised their children with those same values, teaching them the importance of kindness, hard work, and standing up for what was right. One summer afternoon in 1902, when Samuel was 14, Elizabeth was 11, and Joseph was 8, the family took a picnic out to the canyon where Gideon and Hannah's story had begun. It had become a tradition over the years, a way of remembering and honoring the moment that had changed everything. As they sat eating sandwiches and drinking lemonade, Samuel looked at his parents and asked the question he had asked dozens of times before. "Tell us the story again, Pa. Tell us how you saved Ma." Gideon glanced at Hannah, and she smiled and nodded. So he told the story, as he had told it so many times before, but it never got old. He spoke of seeing her caught in the harness, of the fear that had gripped his heart, of the desperate race against time. He told them about the jump, The role, the moment when they had both lain in the dust, alive against all odds. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they knew every word by heart. When Gideon finished, Elizabeth said softly, "That is the most romantic story ever, Pa." "It is a true story," Hannah said, reaching over to take Gideon's hand. "And the best part is not even the rescue, as dramatic as that was. The best part is what came after. The falling in love, the building of a life together, the family we created. That is the real story." "You are both heroes," Joseph said seriously. "Ma for being so brave and Pa for saving her." "We are just people who love each other," Gideon said, "and who were lucky enough to find each other when it mattered most." As they packed up the picnic and headed back to the ranch, the children running ahead, Gideon and Hannah walked hand in hand, their fingers intertwined in a gesture as natural as breathing. 15 years of marriage had only deepened their love, had weathered it and strengthened it until it was as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. That night, after the children were in bed, Gideon and Hannah sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Gideon had his arm around his wife, and she had her head on his shoulder, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Hannah said, "Thank you." Gideon looked down at her, puzzled. "For what?" "For being there that day," Hannah said, "for not hesitating, for choosing to save a stranger who would become the love of your life, for every day since then, for this life we have built, for everything." Gideon kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me save you, for choosing to love me back, for giving me these beautiful children and this beautiful life. I wake up every morning grateful for that day, Hannah. Grateful that I was riding across those plains at exactly the right moment. Grateful for every second I have had with you since." They sat in the peaceful darkness, two souls that had found each other in chaos and had created something extraordinary together. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but some things remained constant. Love, family, the bonds that held people together through joy and sorrow, through danger and safety, through all the years of a life well lived. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. When Samuel was 17, he announced his intention to attend college in Denver to study veterinary medicine. It was hard to let him go, but both Gideon and Hannah were proud of his ambition and determination. Elizabeth showed remarkable talent as an artist and began selling her paintings to visitors from back east who were fascinated by depictions of the western landscape. Joseph proved to have his father's way with horses and spent every free moment at the ranch, learning everything Gideon could teach him. Hannah's shop continued to prosper, and in 1906, she published a small book of dress patterns that sold well throughout Colorado and the surrounding territories. Gideon's horse training business was equally successful, and they were able to expand the ranch, buying adjacent parcels of land and building a larger stable. But the true measure of their success was not in money or land or recognition. It was in the love that filled their home, in the laughter of their children, in the quiet moments when Gideon and Hannah would catch each other's eye across a crowded room and share a smile that spoke volumes. It was in the way they still held hands when they walked, the way they still kissed each other good morning and good night, the way they still looked at each other with the same wonder and love they had felt on that desperate day when fate had brought them together. In 1908, Samuel graduated from veterinary school and returned to Ordway to open his own practice. The town had grown considerably over the years, with new businesses and families arriving regularly, and there was plenty of work to keep him busy. He courted and married a sweet young woman named Catherine, and in 1910, he made Gideon and Hannah grandparents for the first time when his son was born. Holding his grandson for the first time, Gideon felt tears prick his eyes as he remembered holding Samuel the same way 22 years earlier. The circle of life continued, the generations flowing one into the next, and he was grateful beyond words to be part of it. Elizabeth married a photographer from Denver in 1911, a kind man who appreciated her artistic nature and encouraged her work. They settled in Colorado Springs, where Elizabeth opened a small gallery and continued to paint the landscapes she loved. Joseph remained at the ranch, taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Gideon gradually stepped back, content to spend his time training only the horses that truly interested him. In 1915, Gideon and Hannah celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. Their hair was now streaked with silver, their faces lined with the marks of years well lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man and woman who had found each other on that desperate day in 1887. They returned to the canyon for their anniversary, just the two of them this time. It had been years since they had been there alone, and as they stood at the edge, looking down at the rocks below, Hannah shivered and moved closer to Gideon's side. "I still cannot believe how close I came to dying that day," she said quietly, "and how incredibly blessed I have been ever since." "We have both been blessed," Gideon said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on the top of her head. "I was just a drifter back then, working odd jobs, no real purpose or direction, and then I saw you, and everything changed. Suddenly, I had a reason to build a life, to put down roots, to become the man I always should have been." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "You were always that man, Gideon. You just needed the right reason to show it." They kissed, slow and sweet, the kiss of two people who had loved each other through decades and knew they would continue to love each other for whatever time remained. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Do you remember what you said to me, right after you saved me?" Hannah asked. "You said, 'You are all right. You are safe now. I have got you.'" "I remember," Gideon said. "You have kept that promise every day since," Hannah told him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Every single day you have made me feel safe and loved and cherished. You have been my rock, my partner, my greatest love. And I want you to know that I have got you too, Gideon Hayes. I will always have you." "I know," Gideon said, his voice thick with feeling. "I have always known. We have got each other, Hannah, always." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the wind whispering through the grass around them and the sun warm on their faces. Below them, the canyon that had nearly claimed Hannah's life stood as a testament to how fragile existence could be and how precious. But they had survived, and they had thrived, and they had built something beautiful out of those desperate moments. As they finally turned to walk back to their wagon, hand in hand, Gideon found himself thinking about all the small moments that had led to that one pivotal day. If he had left the ranch 10 minutes later, he would not have been there. If Hannah had not stopped in Ordway, she would have been in Denver when the accident happened to someone else entirely. If the horses had not spooked at that exact moment, in that exact place, their paths might never have crossed. But they had. Against all odds, in a moment of terror and danger, two souls had found each other, and from that moment they had built a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. 3 children, now grown with lives of their own. A successful business that provided for others. A ranch that would pass to future generations. A love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. As they rode back to the ranch, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of orange and gold, Hannah leaned against Gideon's shoulder and said softly, "I would do it all again, you know. Even knowing how terrifying it would be, even knowing I would nearly die, I would do it all again just to end up here, with you." "So would I," Gideon said, kissing her temple, "every single second." The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Gideon and Hannah gradually stepped back from their businesses, turning over the daily operations to their children while they focused on enjoying the life they had built. They traveled a little, visiting Elizabeth in Colorado Springs and taking a trip to see the ocean in California, something they had always dreamed of doing. But they always came back to Ordway, to the ranch, to the land that had witnessed their love story and held their memories. In 1920, they celebrated their grandson Samuel's 10th birthday with a large party at the ranch. All their children were there, along with daughters-in-law and sons-in-law, and a growing brood of grandchildren. As Gideon watched his family laughing and playing together, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. This was his legacy. Not the horses he had trained or the land he had acquired, but this family, these people who carried his and Hannah's love forward into the future. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Gideon and Hannah sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The crickets sang their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the darkness. "We did good, did we not?" Hannah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We did very good," Gideon agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day? Hannah asked. If I had died in that canyon? I try not to, Gideon admitted, but sometimes I do. And every time I am overwhelmed by how lucky we were, how many things had to go exactly right for us to be here now. It was not luck, Hannah said firmly. It was fate. It was meant to be. We were meant to find each other, Gideon. I have always believed that. Then I believe it too, Gideon said, pulling her close. And I am grateful for whatever force in the universe decided to bring us together. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds. Finally, Hannah yawned and stretched. We should go to bed. Morning will come early. It always does, Gideon said with a smile, but I would not have it any other way. As they made their way inside, Gideon paused at the door and looked back at the darkened prairie stretching out beyond their land. Somewhere out there was the canyon where it had all begun, the place where a scream had cut through the afternoon air and changed two lives forever, the place where a cowboy had made a split-second decision to risk everything for a stranger, the place where a love story had been born in fear and desperation and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. He sent a silent thank you out into the night to whatever power had put him in the right place at the right time, and then he went inside to join his wife, closing the door behind him on another perfect day. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Gideon and Hannah aged gracefully together. They were blessed with good health and sharp minds, able to continue enjoying life even as their bodies inevitably slowed. They spent their days working in the garden, reading together on the porch, playing with their grandchildren when they visited, and simply being together. After so many years, they had learned to communicate without words, understanding each other's moods and needs with just a glance or a touch. In 1925, the town of Ordway celebrated its 40th anniversary, and Gideon and Hannah were asked to speak at the celebration as two of the town's longest-standing residents. Standing before the crowd, with their family gathered in the front row and their friends and neighbors filling the seats behind, Hannah told the story of how they had met. She spoke of the terror of being dragged toward the canyon, of the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life, of the love that had grown from that desperate moment. Ordway has been our home for nearly 40 years, Hannah said, her voice still strong despite her age. We have raised our family here, built our businesses here, made our lives here. This town gave us a chance when we were both starting over, and we have never regretted choosing to stay. But more than that, this town is where our love story began, where Gideon saved me, and where I, in turn, saved him by giving him a reason to build a real life. We are forever grateful to this community for welcoming us and supporting us all these years. The crowd erupted in applause, and Gideon saw tears on many faces as people responded to the emotion and sincerity in Hannah's words. When she returned to her seat beside him, he took her hand and squeezed it gently, his heart full to bursting with love and pride. That night, as they lay in bed, Hannah turned to Gideon in the darkness. "Do you think we will die together?" she asked quietly. "I do not think I could bear to live without you." "I do not want to live without you either," Gideon admitted. "But we do not get to choose these things, my love. All we can do is treasure every day we have together and trust that when the time comes, we will find the strength to face whatever happens." "As long as I have you, I can face anything," Hannah whispered. "You taught me that on the day you saved me. You showed me what courage looks like, what love looks like. Everything good in my life has come from that moment." "Everything good in my life has come from you," Gideon replied. "From the moment I pulled you into my arms and felt your heartbeat, I knew my life would never be the same, and it has been better than I ever dreamed possible." They fell asleep holding each other, and their dreams were filled with golden memories of a life well lived and a love that had conquered every challenge. The years crept by, gentle but inexorable. Samuel took over the ranch completely, running it with the same care and attention his father had shown. He and Catherine had 3 children who filled the house with laughter and energy. Elizabeth's art had gained recognition beyond Colorado, with her paintings displayed in galleries across the country. Joseph had married a rancher's daughter, and together they were building their own horse breeding operation on land adjacent to the family ranch, ensuring that the Hayes legacy would continue for generations to come. In the summer of 1930, Gideon and Hannah celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary. They were both in their late 60s now, their hair completely white, their movements slower, but still steady. They had decided years ago that they would not travel anymore, content to stay close to home and family. But for their anniversary, Joseph surprised them by setting up a tent camp near the canyon, complete with comfortable chairs and a feast of their favorite foods. The entire family gathered there as the sun set, 3 generations coming together to honor the love story that had started it all. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 20 down to 5, listened with wide eyes as Gideon told the story one more time, his voice perhaps not as strong as it once was, but filled with the same emotion and conviction. "The thing you have to understand," Gideon said, looking at each of his grandchildren in turn, "is that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every day. I chose to save your grandmother that day, and she chose to let me into her life. And every day since, we have both chosen to love each other, to work together, to build something lasting. That is what real love is. It is commitment and partnership and choosing each other over and over again, no matter what life throws at you." "Tell us the best part, Grandpa," the youngest granddaughter said. "Tell us about when you knew you loved Grandma." Gideon smiled and looked at Hannah, who smiled back with the same love and warmth she had always shown him. "The moment I knew I loved her was when we were sitting on a bench in Mrs. Crawford's garden about a month after I saved her. She looked at me and said she thought she was falling in love with me, and I realized I had already fallen, that I had been hers from the moment I held her in the dust and felt her alive and safe in my arms." "And when did you know you loved him, Grandma?" another grandchild asked. "I think I knew the moment he jumped off his horse to save me," Hannah said softly, "because I saw in that instant that he was willing to die for a stranger, and I knew that was the kind of man I wanted to spend my life with. Someone brave and good and selfless. Everything after that just confirmed what my heart already knew." As the stars came out and the campfire crackled, the family shared stories and laughter and love. The grandchildren fell asleep one by one, wrapped in blankets, their faces peaceful in the firelight. The adult children sat talking quietly with their parents, reminiscing about childhood memories and sharing hopes for the future. Finally, when even the adults had begun to drift off to bed, Gideon and Hannah remained by the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket, holding each other close. "This has been a perfect day," Hannah said softly. "Thank you for 43 years of perfect days." "They have not all been perfect," Gideon said with a smile. "There have been hard times too. But even the hard times were easier because we faced them together." "That is what makes them perfect," Hannah said. "Not that everything was easy, but that we had each other through all of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. In the distance, the canyon stood dark and silent, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how precious every moment was. But Gideon and Hannah were not afraid of the canyon or what it represented. They had faced death that day and won, and everything since had been a gift. "I love you, Hannah Hayes," Gideon said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you for 43 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left, and I will love you beyond that into whatever comes after." "I love you, Gideon Hayes," Hannah replied. "You are my hero, my partner, my best friend, my everything. Whatever time we have left, I want to spend every second of it with you." They kissed in the dying firelight, a gentle kiss filled with decades of love and understanding. And when they finally made their way to the tent that had been set up for them, they fell asleep in each other's arms, content and grateful for the life they had built together. The following years brought both joy and sorrow, as all years do. They buried old friends and welcomed new grandchildren. They celebrated marriages and mourned losses. They watched the world change around them, with automobiles becoming common and electricity reaching even the rural areas. But through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's anchor. In 1935, at the age of 72, Gideon began to slow down noticeably. His joints ached in the morning, and he tired more easily than before. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Hannah never wavered. She cared for him with the same devotion she had always shown, helping him with tasks that had become difficult and sitting with him for hours as they read or simply held hands in comfortable silence. One evening in the spring of 1936, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Gideon turned to Hannah and said, "I've been thinking about that day a lot lately. The day I saved you." "So have I," Hannah admitted. "I've been dreaming about it." "I want you to know," Gideon said carefully, "that even if I had known then that it would cost me my life, I still would have done it. Saving you, loving you, building this life with you has been worth everything. If I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest man who ever lived." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. "Please do not talk about dying. I am not ready to lose you." "I'm not planning on going anywhere just yet," Gideon said with a gentle smile. "But when the time comes, and it will come for both of us eventually, I want you to know that I have no regrets, only gratitude for every moment we have had together." "I feel the same way," Hannah whispered, "but I still want more time. I want 1,000 more sunsets with you, 1,000 more mornings waking up beside you." "Then we will have them," Gideon promised, "as many as fate will give us." They did get more time, precious months that stretched into years. Gideon's health stabilized, and while he was never as strong as he had been in his youth, he was able to continue enjoying life. He and Hannah took walks around the ranch every evening that the weather permitted, moving slowly but steadily, their hands always linked. They sat with their grandchildren and told them stories of the old days, when the West was still wild and anything seemed possible. They celebrated each holiday and birthday with their ever-growing family, their hearts full to bursting with love and pride. In the autumn of 1938, as the leaves turned gold and red and the air grew crisp, Gideon and Hannah prepared for their 51st wedding anniversary. It seemed impossible that so many years had passed, that the young cowboy and the terrified woman he had saved had become this elderly couple, surrounded by the fruits of their love. The family planned a large celebration at the ranch, with relatives traveling from as far as California and Texas to attend. But a week before the party, Gideon woke in the night with pains in his chest. The doctor was called, and after a thorough examination, he took Hannah aside and told her gently that Gideon's heart was failing. It could be days or weeks or even months, but the end was coming. Hannah took the news with the same courage she had shown throughout her life. She did not fall apart or rail against the unfairness of it. She simply nodded, thanked the doctor, and returned to Gideon's bedside to hold his hand and tell him that everything would be all right. "Hannah," Gideon said weakly, "I heard what the doctor said." "Then you know we need to make every moment count," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You promised me more sunsets, Gideon Hayes, and I'm holding you to that promise." He smiled, loving her strength and determination. "As many as I can give you, my love." The anniversary celebration was moved up and simplified, held in Gideon and Hannah's bedroom with just the immediate family present. Samuel, Elizabeth, and Joseph gathered around their parents' bed with their spouses and children, and together they toasted to 51 years of love and partnership. Gideon was too weak to sit up, but he smiled at each person in the room, his eyes lingering longest on Hannah. "I am the luckiest man who ever lived," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "to have been loved by this woman, to have created this family, to have lived this life. I am grateful for every second." "We are the lucky ones, Pa," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Ma taught us what love looks like, what commitment looks like. You gave us the best possible example of how to live." "Your mother did that," Gideon said. "I just followed her lead." "We did it together," Hannah corrected gently. "Everything we built together." After the family had said their goodbyes and reluctantly left the room, giving their parents some privacy, Hannah climbed carefully into bed beside Gideon and nestled against his side, her head on his shoulder, just as she had done for 51 years. "Do you remember what you said to me right after you saved me?" she asked softly. "Tell me," Gideon said. "You said you are all right. You are safe now. I have got you." Hannah's voice broke. "I need you to say it again, Gideon. I need to hear it one more time." Gideon gathered what strength he had left and wrapped his arm around his wife, pulling her close. "You are all right, my love. You are safe now. I have got you. I will always have you even when I am gone. My love will never leave you." "And mine will never leave you," Hannah whispered. "In this life and whatever comes after, I am yours and you are mine." They lay together in the quiet room, listening to each other breathe, feeling each other's heartbeat, Outside, the sun was setting in a blaze of glory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, just as it had on that day 51 years ago when their story had begun. "Hannah," Gideon said suddenly, "look at me." She lifted her head to meet his eyes, and even through the tears she saw the love there, undimmed by age or illness. "Paki?" "Thank you," he said, "for letting me save you, for loving me back, for giving me a reason to live, and now a reason to die without fear, because I know that what we built together will live on. In our children, our grandchildren, all the lives we touched. We did something beautiful, Hannah. We took a moment of terror and turned it into a lifetime of love." "We did," Hannah agreed, her hand cupping his weathered face, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Gideon said, "every single second." He closed his eyes then, a small smile on his lips, and his breathing gradually slowed. Hannah held him close, her tears falling silently as she felt his heartbeat grow fainter. She whispered words of love to him, reminding him of all their best moments, assuring him that she would be all right, that their family would be all right, that the love they had built would endure. As the last light of the sunset faded from the sky, Gideon Hayes took his final breath, wrapped in the arms of the woman he had saved and who had, in turn, saved him. He died peacefully, without pain, surrounded by love. Hannah held him for a long time after he was gone, unwilling to let go, not ready to face a world without him in it. But eventually, she gently kissed his forehead and called for their children. They came immediately, and together they grieved the loss of a man who had been a hero, a father, a husband, and a friend. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like everyone in Ordway and the surrounding area came to pay their respects. Person after person stood up to share stories of Gideon's kindness, his quiet strength, his willingness to help anyone in need. But the most powerful moment came when Hannah herself stood to speak. "My husband saved my life 51 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the grief written on her face. "He jumped off a galloping horse to pull me from danger, risking his own life without a second thought. That act of courage and selflessness set the tone for our entire marriage. Gideon spent 51 years making sure I felt safe and loved and cherished. He was my hero in every sense of the word. And while my heart is broken to lose him, I am grateful beyond measure for every day we had together. He taught me what love really means, and I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life." The burial was held at the ranch, on a hill overlooking the canyon where their story had begun. As they lowered Gideon's casket into the ground, Hannah stood between her children. Her grandchildren gathered around and said a silent goodbye to the love of her life. The months that followed were difficult. Hannah moved back to the house above the dress shop in town, unable to bear being at the ranch without Gideon. Her children visited frequently, making sure she was eating and sleeping and not withdrawing too far into her grief. Slowly, gradually, she began to find her footing again. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them to sew and telling them stories about their grandfather. She volunteered at the church and the school, keeping herself busy and useful. But every evening, as the sun set, she would sit on her small balcony and think about Gideon. She would remember his smile, his laugh, the way he had held her. She would replay their conversations in her mind, treasuring each memory like a precious jewel. And she would feel his presence with her, as real and solid as if he were sitting beside her, his hand in hers. 2 years after Gideon's death, in the spring of 1940, Hannah began to feel her own strength fading. The doctor said her heart was weak, worn out by age and grief. Her children wanted her to fight, to hold on, but Hannah knew it was time. She had lived a full life, a good life, and she was ready to rest. On a warm May evening, with her 3 children and several grandchildren gathered around her bed, Hannah Olsen Hayes closed her eyes for the last time. Her final words were a smile and a whisper. "I am coming, Gideon. Wait for me." She was buried beside her husband on the hill overlooking the canyon, and the entire town of Ordway turned out to honor the woman who had been such an integral part of their community for more than 50 years. At the funeral, Elizabeth stood to speak about her mother. "My mother was the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known," Elizabeth said. "She faced death at 22 and refused to let it define her. Instead, she built a life full of love and purpose and meaning. She loved my father with a depth and constancy that inspired everyone who knew them. And she taught us, her children and grandchildren, what it means to live with courage and grace. She will be missed beyond measure, but her legacy will live on in all of us. The years rolled on, as years always do. The Hayes children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the values and lessons Gideon and Hannah had taught them. The ranch prospered, the dress shop was eventually taken over by one of Hannah's granddaughters, and the family grew larger with each generation. The story of how Gideon had saved Hannah became a legend in Ordway, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But for those who had known them, who had seen the deep and abiding love between them, it was not a myth at all. It was a testament to the power of courage, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. Decades later, when the grandchildren were old themselves and sharing the story with their own grandchildren, they would tell it this way. Once upon a time, in the wild west of Colorado, a cowboy heard a woman screaming as runaway horses dragged her toward certain death. He did not hesitate, did not calculate the risk, did not think about his own safety. He simply acted, throwing himself into danger to save a stranger's life. And from that single act of heroism grew a love story for the ages, a marriage that lasted over half a century, and a family legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story of how one moment of courage can change everything, and how love, once found, can conquer even death itself. And every time the story was told, the teller would end the same way. They found each other in the most desperate of circumstances, and they never let go. They lived fully, loved deeply, and died knowing they had built something beautiful together. And that, in the end, is all any of us can hope for.